compelled to ask you a somewhat amazing moment on Thursday night on Real Time with Bill Maher, a show in which you have appeared several times. You're good at that stuff, and Bill Maher likes you, even though he disagrees with your politics generally. On that show, you have defended the U.S. embargo against Cuba. On Thursday night, Charlie Crist was on the show, and he said he thinks it's time for the embargo to end. Let's watch this clip.
I don't see a lot of politicians from Florida having the courage to stand up to that small Cuban community.
Well, I think they need to. I think it's the right thing. I mean, the embargo's been there, what, 50 years now?
Right.
I don't think it worked. It is obvious to me that we need to move forward, and I think get the embargo taken away. Really, I believe that. From a selfish point of view, as a Floridian, I'd like to see that happen because a lot of construction would be required on the island, and South Florida could be the launching pad for all of that and really create some jobs for the people of my state. And I think.
All right.
Holy moly shamoly. Construction being the reason, construction in Florida being the reason to do away with the embargo. First of all, look, Charlie Crist, he doesn't have a principle in his body. I don't think he can spell it in the right way. If you are for the embargo, Charlie Crist is your candidate. If you're against it, if you're ambivalent toward the embargo, he's had a position, every position on every topic in just this calendar year. So what Charlie Crist says and what he thinks, that's of the moment. By the time the election comes, he will have had maybe 10 more evolutions. The reality is this. First of all, how dismissive of Bill Maher to be talking about the courage to stand up to this small Cuban community. Let me tell you about this Cuban community, and you know it so well. These are families of political prisoners. These are ex-political prisoners themselves who have suffered the tyranny and the dictatorship of a communist regime that denies basic liberties, freedoms, fundamental rights to its citizens. Right. And that's what our tiny exile community is advocating for. And Charlie Crist understood that when it was politically convenient for him to do so, and now it's politically convenient for him to be more left of the left.
This is, for a guy who has changed positions on every major issue, it is, frankly, to me, somewhat
in a short
surprising.
period of time. Because, look, all of us who've been around a long time, we've evolved on many issues.
Sure.
But Charlie Crist's politically expedient views have evolved in the last 6 months.
Yeah. But I have to say, as the Miami Herald article this morning pointed out, the polls that have been done seem to indicate there is, among maybe generations of Cuban Americans, younger ones don't see the value of the embargo so much. People of your generation, my generation, believe that, in fact, it has some value. I mean, the Cuban community is not monolithic on the embargo.
Well, Michael, excellent question, excellent theme. If my dad were still around, he would put in his VHS tapes that we have done on this show, interviews that we've had over the past 30 years, where I have been asked that same question about this ever-evolving, ever-changing views of our exile community about the embargo. And maybe it depends on how the question is being asked and what kind of response is elicited. But if you ask people in our community, are they for holding back on investment in Cuba until we have freedom, respect for human rights, multi-party elections, freedom of assembly, and free press, people would say yes. You know, we had international solidarity against a terrible apartheid government in South Africa. Right. We lack that in Cuba. I realize that, and it would be better to have multilateral sanctions. But doing the right thing is the right thing to do, even if you have to do it alone.
Yeah, I would point out that Charlie Crist made his comment just days after the Castro regime rounded up 1,000 Cuban dissidents during their cumbre with their buddies from some Latin American countries and detained them, threw them in jail, and violated their human rights.
In fact, there have been a record number of arrests every month this calendar year than in the year before. So much for these reforms of Raul Castro.
Congresswoman, Charlie Crist isn't the only voice of a prominent person being raised. I think more significantly, the sugar baron from Palm Beach, Alfie van Hoel, Today, it was reported in the Washington Post and the Miami Herald that he's taken a couple of trips to Cuba. He wants to plant his family flag maybe back on the island, bring the people together, and obviously also maybe recapture his sugar industry in Cuba. What do you think of Mr.
Well, I think the latter rather than the former. He's more interested in recapturing that wealth and exploiting the Cuban people because, as the Washington Post article pointed out, that was favorable to him, that his eyes were teary-eyed when he looked upon his mansion, meaning he's worried about the wealth that he had lost, and he had spoken to not the ladies in white who received beatings every day, not the Antunes who was rounded up and everything in his house ransacked, a great Afro-Cuban leader, but his eyes teared up because he was looking at his confiscated mansion. He never talked about freedom or democracy or human rights, and I think it's a sad state of affairs when you have that happen. And I realize, that greed is good is kind of the motif for many people, but some of us believe that freedom is better.
All right, let's